Welcome back to the Marvel Podcast for gifted listeners. I hope you enjoyed learning about the team that would be known as the Thunderbolts, and now know how the movie chose to adapt the team. In this week's episode, we're going to look at which heroes and villains have similar powers or concepts between the two big comic companies, DC and Marvel, and see who made the hero first. We're also going to look at why these heroes are being compared with each other. Some seem pretty obvious, like Namor and Aquaman. Others, maybe not as much, like the Joker and the Green Goblin. But I will justify why I'm making these comparisons, and yeah, it's just going to be a kind of fun look at the two different companies and most of their characters. There won't be any phases in this episode, just a fun little lore dump between two companies and, what they have brought us. So, without further ado, let's get into it. First off, we're going to look at Namor vs. Aquaman. Namor did come first because he debuted in 1939, while Aquaman didn't show up until 2 years later in 1941. Both characters have similar origins, where an Atlantean princess falls for a human and they have a child. Namor's father was an explorer looking for vibranium, while Aquaman's father ran a lighthouse. Both movies that told their origins did a great job at telling them. And something fun I learned while doing the research for this is that Namor's last name is actually Mackenzie, which is his father's surname. I'm assuming he doesn't go by it because of it being something that surface dwellers do, and Namor hates the surface world. The next two characters we're going to take a look at is Deadpool vs. Deathstroke. Deadpool debuted in 1991, while Deathstroke debuted in 1980. A lot of people assume that Deadpool is a parody of Deathstroke because of the similarities between the two characters. These similarities include, them both being mercenaries, both using guns, both using swords, and even their costumes look similar. And they even share similar names. Slade Wilson, Wade Wilson. It can be seen why they would be a parody of each other, or why Deadpool would be a parody of Deathstroke. But in reality, Deadpool is a parody of Snake Eye from G.I. Joe. In an interview with Rob Liefeld, he said that he took inspiration for the Merc with the Mouth from Snake Eye. The next comparison is going to be the Nova Corps versus the Green Lantern Corps. These two may not seem similar at first, but when you kind of look at what the organizations do, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. The Green Lantern Corps did debut in 1959, while the Nova Corps debuted in 1979. When the Nova Corps debuted, they weren't similar to the Green Lantern Corps, but they eventually became similar in context. Much like the Green Lantern Corps with Hal Jordan, Richard Rider was also recruited into his Galactic Corps by a dying alien who passes powers onto a human. Both interstellar organizations are made up of members from many different species across the galaxy, who are assigned to keep the peace throughout their respective galaxies. Both draw energy from cosmic forces that endow them with incredible powers. And both groups have passed their mantle on to younger generations to carry on the legacy of the Nova Corps and the Green Lantern Corps. Next up, we're looking at Thanos vs. Darkseid. Darkseid had been created in 1971, while Thanos came along 2 years later in 1973. The reason these two are often compared is because they are the big looming presence between their two companies. Thanos collects the Infinity Gauntlet and challenges the Avengers, while Darkseid runs Apocalypse, tries to take over Earth, fights the Justice League, and they're also both big impending forces. For real-world context of why they also might be compared is because Darkseid is known as a new god. A new god was a race of superpowered individuals who are essentially like they say, new gods of the DC world. Well, this concept was actually going to be implemented in Marvel Comics after Ragnarok had killed off the Asgardians. But before Jack Kirby could implement this into Marvel Comics, he packed up his pens and had gone to DC. Hence why the New Gods are a DC property, a Marvel property. But between the two, Darkseid is the more imposing force in my opinion because he has his Omega Beams and can fight Justice League with his raw power. Where Thanos, yes, he was able to fight the Avengers, but he needed the gauntlet to do it. Next up, we're looking at some archery. We're looking at Hawkeye versus Green Arrow. Yes, they are both archers, and they both actually have love interests who are bird-themed, with Green Arrow being in love with Black Canary, and Hawkeye being in love with Mockingbird. They would both have sidekicks / proteges who would have their own mantle if not taking up their own. Where Green Arrow had Speedy, who became Red Arrow, and Hawkeye had Kate Bishop, who would go on to take the mantle of Hawkeye. Where they differ is that, yes, they may have both been orphans, but Clint was poor, Ollie was rich. Also, Clint has some disabilities where he is hard of hearing and or deaf in more modern comics, where Ollie is not. Also, Clint started off as a villain, but went on to be the leader of a few teams within the Marvel Universe, including the West Coast Avengers and the Thunderbolts. While Ollie was always a hero, and he was always just a member of the Justice League, he never went on to lead them. This next comparison is going to be a godly comparison. It'll be Thor versus Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was created in 1941, while the Marvel Comics iteration of Thor was created in 1962. These two often get compared because they are the gods of their respective team. While Thor is a full god, Diana is a demigod. They do both have godly parents, where Thor has Odin and Diana has Zeus. And another reason they get compared is because they are both founding members of their respective teams. Diana helped form the Justice League, Thor helped form the Avengers. Our next entry is what I mentioned in the intro, and it's going to be a little crazy. And that's comparing the Green Goblin to the Joker. The Joker debuted in 1940, while the Green Goblin didn't debut in 1964. These two I'm lumping together, and I've seen them compared a lot for a few reasons. A is, I think it's because they are the two antagonists of each company's arguably most popular heroes. Joker being the Batman's main villain, and Green Goblin being Spider-Man's main villain. These two are also both really insane, whereas Joker causes mayhem all the time. The Green Goblin also causes mayhem, but he did do an act that is more devastating than what the Joker has done in the main continuity, and that is killing Gwen Stacy, Peter's main love interest. Not only did killing Gwen Stacy mess with Spider-Man for the rest of his comics career, it also changed the comic industry as a whole, where the Joker, in some stories he's killed some members of the Bat family, but nothing as devastating as Gwen Stacy, at least in my opinion. Also, these two get compared because they are both so iconic, where they were the villains of the first live-action adaptation of each hero, and they also appear in almost every version of media of said heroes. Next, we're going to get real fast, and we're going to look at the similarities and differences between Quicksilver and the Flash. The Flash did come first in 1940, and Quicksilver came about 23 years later in 1963. Yes, they are both super fast. It has been established that Flash is faster than Quicksilver in a few official crossover events, but that's kind of where their similarities kind of end, except for one. One difference is how the two get their powers. With Quicksilver, it's his mutant X gene, which is how all mutants get their powers. But the Flash, his powers derive from the Speed Force, as do all speedsters in the DC universe. And the Flash is a legacy title, where Quicksilver is his own moniker for one specific character. When we're talking about the Flash, a lot of people think Barry Allen, especially because of the CW show. And one thing that the two that the two characters share in common is that they're actually both twins. Obviously, Pietro has a very well-known twin in the form of Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch, where Barry's twin isn't as known because he's not referenced a lot in media, and he was also separated from Barry at birth, and we have only seen him in a handful of storylines. Quicksilver, just like Hawkeye, did start off as a villain, as a member of the Brotherhood of Mutants, but would eventually help the X-Men and Avengers in a heroic way. And then with Barry, much like Ollie, he has been a hero from the get-go. Looking into the mystical side of each company, we have Doctor Strange versus Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate had debuted in 1940, while Doctor Strange didn't come along until 1963. These two are both masters of mystic arts within their respective universes, but like with the Flash, Dr. Fate is a moniker that can be passed down or around, where Doctor Strange is his moniker and his name. Yes, there are other Sorcerer Supremes, but there is only one Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange had to spend years studying magic to become the powerful sorcerer he is, while Dr. Fate had found the helmet of Nabu, or the helmet of fate, during an archaeological expedition, put it on, and became the vessel for Nabu, the powerful Lord of Order, and has seemingly unlimited power. With Doctor Strange, he always has his magical ability, but when the wielder of the Helmet of Fate is not wearing it, they do not possess said magical power. And Doctor Strange turned to the mystic arts after an accident, where Dr. Fate, the original Dr. Fate, found the helmet, like I said, during an archaeological expedition. Now that we're going to be looking smaller, let's look at Ant-Man versus the Atom. The Atom came around in 1940, and Ant-Man came in 1962. Even though Ant-Man came around 22 years later, the shrinking is kind of where these two heroes separate. Whereas Ant-Man can shrink to tiny sizes and grow to massive sizes, the Atom can only shrink down to subatomic size and back up to normal human size. Ant-Man uses Pym particles for his shrinking and growing, where the Atom uses a biobelt made of a dwarf star. The Atom prefers to be on a subatomic level to do his work and research, where Ant-Man really likes to be in his human size form whenever he is doing his work. And the final difference is that Ant-Man can talk to insects. The Atom cannot. Now, getting stretchy, we're going to look at Mr. Fantastic and Plastic Man. Plastic Man debuted in 1941, while Mr. Fantastic didn't come around until about 20 years later. The two can stretch to unbelievable lengths, essentially shapeshift their bodies with their stretching abilities, and that's kind of how the two compare. They have almost identical powers. The only difference is that Plastic Man has been shown to have no limitation to stretching, where Reed has canonically been shown to only have 1,500 feet of stretching ability. Plastic Man is one of the DC characters that has a criminal past that turned hero, where Reed has always had a scientific past and has been a hero for most of his comics career. Now we're going to look at Magneto versus Dr. Polaris, which is probably the one comparison that I almost have never seen before, but it's an interesting one to look at. And this is one where it's really hard to determine if any copying ever took place between the two. Magneto debuted in September of 1963, where Dr. Polaris debuted in August of 1963. They are both masters of magnetism, but Magneto gains his powers from his mutant X gene, like every other mutant in the Marvel Universe, where Dr. Polaris had pelted himself with magnetic fields until he became a master of magnetism. Dr. Polaris was a scientist who turned to villainy after his experimentation and becoming a master of magnetism, where Magneto was a Holocaust survivor and is a villain because he wants to destroy humans for not giving mutants their proper rights. And that's kind of where those two stand. And honestly, I don't think one really copied the other because they both came out at about the same time, and there wasn't really time for Marvel to look at Dr. Polaris and DC and go, you know what we should do? We should make one of our own, just because of how closely they came out together. Because honestly, the Magneto could have been inked and ready to be published by the time Polaris hit newsstand shelves. And for our last comparison of this episode, we're going to look at characters who have returned from the dead. And those two are going to be the Winter Soldier, who debuted in 2004, and Red Hood, who debuted in 2005. And yes, the characters of Bucky Barnes and Jason Todd are much older than these counterparts. But these modern versions of these characters is why they are compared. Because both died and were assumed dead. Like, it was a joke that no one stays dead in comics except for Bucky Barnes, Jason Todd, Gwen Stacy, and Uncle Ben. That joke is no longer relevant because everybody but Uncle Ben has come back from the dead. But still, you get the gist. Bucky was the sidekick to Captain America, where Jason Todd was the second Robin to Batman. Bucky had not joined Cap after he was unfrozen after World War II, where Jason Todd had died by the hands of the Joker. And also, the fans voted to kill Jason Todd. No one voted to kill Bucky Barnes. When they returned, they were gun-toting badasses who didn't really fall into the hero moniker when they returned. Bucky eventually escaped his Winter Soldier brainwashing and would join Captain America, eventually taking on the mantle of Captain America for a bit. Whereas Jason Todd would eventually join the Bat family, even though Batman has his no-kill rule, but he's able to heal. And in some Elseworld stories, he does take on the moniker of Batman. And I think that's going to be our last look at for today. I think this was a decent list. There are some more to explore, and possibly could do a sequel episode. But I think these are some of the most popular comparisons that are understandable. Yes, there is a comparison of Captain America to Superman, but I think that's only because of their morals, not so much their power sets. And I don't know, I just didn't think that comparison was a fair one to put in here, in my opinion. And the whole debate about who came first, blah, 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 I think is kind of an unfair debate to look at, especially if you look at comics history, because DC was publishing superheroes in the 30s. Whereas, yeah, Marvel had some heroes in the 40s, but they were not really a superhero comic company. They were just a comic company who really just tried whatever genre worked. It wasn't until 1961, when they made the Fantastic Four, that the company truly became a superhero company. And honestly, it's hard to come up with new heroes. Yes, there are similarities between a lot of them, but I think they differ enough where you can't necessarily say that they copy them one for one. And I think that's why it makes sense that a lot of DC heroes came first. And so with that, let's look at the top 5 things we learned in today's episode. Number 1, Namor actually came before Aquaman, in one of the few instances of a Marvel hero being created first. Number 2, even though a lot of people believe that Deadpool is a parody of Deathstroke, he is actually a parody of Snake Eye from G.I. Joe. Number 3, the New Gods of DC were originally intended for Marvel to replace the Asgardians after Ragnarok happened. Number 4, one thing that Barry Allen and Pietro Maximoff have in common is that they are both twins. While Wanda Maximoff, Pietro's twin, is much more well known, Barry Allen's twin does exist and is part of his comics lore. And number 5, between the two stretchy heroes of Marvel and DC, Plastic Man has no restrictions on how far he can stretch, whereas Mr. Fantastic has been shown to have limits to his stretching abilities. Thank you for listening to the Marvel Podcast for Gifted Listeners. I hope that this was a fun look into the two biggest comic companies and how their characters can be the same, but also different. If there are more characters you'd like me to compare in like a sequel episode, let me know by leaving a comment or sending an email to tmpfgl@gmail.com. Next episode, I plan looking into the different styles of magic that inhabit the Marvel Universe, and who are the most well-known users of each style. This episode was written, recorded, and edited by myself, James Basinski. Intro music sourced from freesound.org. You can find us on Instagram at tmpfgl, TikTok at tmpfgl, YouTube at the Marvel Podcast for gift listeners, and you can email any feedback, questions, or suggestions to tmpfgl@gmail.com. Please like, subscribe, and rate the show wherever you listen. Until next time, gifted listeners, thank you for listening, and Excelsior!